The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Glory to you, O Lord. Jesus said to his disciples, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. Everyone who listens to these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who built his house on rock. The rain fell, the floods came, and the winds blew and pushed against the house. But it didn't collapse because it had been built solidly on rock." The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. You guys can be seated. I'll tell you kind of a story about, kind of involved my father. Dad was a great guy. He died about almost 20 years ago. And this was when I was going away to college for the first time, and I transferred. My first 2 years, I was at home. I was at Nassau, or that way, I guess, wherever Nassau is pointed. And so I'm transferring up. It was like the end of August of what was now going to be like the beginning of the start of my junior year. And transferring was kind of a little scary in that I'm going to a place now where everybody else has sort of been there. Transferring in is always a little tough, right? Some of you have probably done that in school. You don't know anybody. Going away for the first time, and I was psyched about going away, but I was also kind of nervous about it. But I lucked out. The dorm that I was living in, or was assigned to, it was a bunch of other transfer kids. So it was almost like we were all freshmen. We were juniors, but we were all brand new. So that was really great. We're all kind of in the same boat. And I really lucked out because literally the first night I got there, I meet this group of kids who just seemed like really cool people. I felt like I made friends like really fast. We hung out first night, had a great time. I liked these kids. Group of guys and girls, there was about 7 of us maybe. And then next day, same thing. It was like, we're having a blast. We're having a great time. I'm like, man, this is the best. I'm just loving college. School hasn't started yet. It was all orientation stuff. So it was like, we didn't have to go to class or study. Parties and just kind of cool, fun things. That went on for like maybe 3 days. And then maybe it was the 4th day, my group of brand new friends, we all had stuff to do that day. We had like, whatever, school-related stuff. So we decided we were all going to get together for dinner. There was a diner in town. We were going to meet for dinner, and then it was a fraternity on campus that was having a party later on. So we were going to go to the dinner and this frat house. So I did my stuff during the day, and then I show up at this diner. I'm waiting around. Maybe it was like 7 o'clock, say. I'm waiting around. It's like 5 after 7, 10 after, quarter after 7. None of these other 6 kids are there. So I'm kind of wondering, like, what's the deal? Maybe waited for a total of 20 minutes, and I left. And I remember for the first time getting a little homesick. I hadn't thought about home at all for the first 3.5 days because I was just loving it, loving being there. Because I know what started to happen. I started to think, man, did these guys like all ditch me? Did they all blow me off? Like, why did nobody show up? So I'm kind of questioning that and kind of feeling like wishing I was back at home. And I went, I guess I went back to my dorm for a little bit, got something to eat there. And I said, all right, I'll go to the fraternity. I'll go to the frat party, and maybe they'll be there. So I went, and they weren't there. And that was worse than waiting in a diner. I mean, the frat's like I'm standing alone like a loser at a party with no friends. So I maybe waited 15 minutes for that, kind of like starting to freak out about like, can't believe they've now done this to me. So I left. I go back to my dorm. Now I'm totally not in a good place, very down. And I'm like to myself, I hate this place. I don't like these people. Phone rings, and it was my mom and dad. So they're kind of annoyed at me because I hadn't called them in like 3 days because I was having such a great time. So anyway, I remember my mom was kind of giving me grief, and so we talked a little bit about how things were going, but I didn't tell them anything about that night and what had just happened. So then eventually my mom got off the phone, but my dad stayed on. I thought he was going to get off too, but he waited. He stayed on the line, and he's like, everything okay, Bri? And we just talked about like everything was fine, and I'm like, yeah. And he goes like there's a pause, and he goes, are you sure? You don't seem kind of yourself. And I said, well, yeah. I mean, and I told him what I just told you guys about these kids. And he said, well, what's the worst case scenario? Like, the worst case is it's true. They ditched you. Well, then they weren't worth it. Like, they treated you that way, then they weren't worth the investment. And you're going to find new friends. And I guess I kind of knew that, but I just wasn't really hearing it and didn't want to hear it. And he said, maybe something happened. Maybe it didn't. Maybe that is the worst case isn't even the deal. But worst case, you're going to be okay. And I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. And then I said, this was Labor Day weekend was coming up. School hadn't even started. And we had off on Labor Day, so it was a 3-day weekend. So I said to my dad, I think I may come home for the long weekend. And then there's this pause, and then he goes, no, I don't think so. And I was like, what do you mean? I wasn't even asking Dad. I was like, I'm just going to come home. And he was like, no, I think you ought to stay up there. I couldn't believe he was saying this. Now, when I left 5 days before, there's no way I was coming home for this 3-day weekend. I was like, I'll see you guys maybe in October or Parents' Weekend, something like that. There's no way I was coming home after 4 days. But now I'm just really feeling lousy. And he says to me, I'm like, why? Why can't I come home? And he goes, listen, if you come home, you're not going to want to go back. You're just going to want to stay. And that's not going to be okay. Like, you're going to be okay. Like, you're going to get through this. And if you kind of bolt, it's going to be harder to go back. So I was like feeling lousy. Now I was feeling worse. So I'm like, all right, fine, whatever. And I'm getting ready to kind of hang up with him. And then he says to me, hey, do you know if the chapel is open at night? Like, is it locked? There's a chapel on campus. And I was like, I don't know. Like, why are you asking me that? Like, who cares if the chapel's open? And I said, and he goes, why don't you go over and see if it's open and go in and say a prayer? It was like the last thing I felt like hearing, the last thing I felt like doing. I was just like, I want to go home. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. I'm just kind of yesing him. And I hung up. And I waited a little while. And I went over to the chapel. It wasn't a good night. It wasn't a good night. The next day, I probably went to the chapel for like 5 minutes. The next day, I'm getting up, feeling rotten, walking across the quad, walking toward the dining hall, and I see 3 of my former friends. And they're coming toward me, and I'm coming toward them, and they say to me, hey, where were you? And I'm like, where was I? Where were you? And they said, we were there. And I said, no, you weren't. I was there. You weren't there. I went to the wrong diner. And then I went to the wrong frat house. Like, both cases, I screwed things up. I never felt so happy to be wrong. Because in realizing I made the mistake, like I realized, oh, they didn't ditch me. They didn't blow me off. I just made a mistake. And like in a moment, it was like a light switch. I went from, I want to go home, I don't like these kids, to now like, oh, it's all okay. And it ended up was okay. I mean, I didn't stay close to all of them for the whole 2 years, but half of them, we were like, I'm still friends with them a million years later. But I remember that night, and I remember now, I look back on it, and I think about my dad and how tough it must have been for him to say, you can't come home. Because he knew I was down. He knew I was lonely. And I'm sure almost everything inside of him was like, yeah, come on. Get on a bus. Come on home. But he kind of knew that just wouldn't be right. at that point. Hey, if this continued and I continued to be really down and hating it, I mean, he wouldn't have said forever, you can't come home. But in that moment, at that point, like, no was kind of what I needed to hear. And how tough that must have been. But guys, here's part of the point. Like, doing the right thing most of the time is tough. Like, it's usually hard. It's usually work. It usually involves sacrifice. You know, no pain, no gain. Like, that's true. My father could have just said, I'm going to make it easy for him. But it wouldn't have been right for me, because I wouldn't have wanted to go back. I would have come up with some lame plan to stay home. And then him saying to me, like, go say a prayer. It's like, why are you telling me to go say a prayer? Like, why are you telling me to go to the chapel? Because he was thinking, you're struggling. You're having a tough time. Like, that's the place to go, guys, when we're not feeling good and when we are feeling alone. I remember being in that chapel, the one that I didn't really want to go to. And I kind of did feel peace when I went in there. I kind of got a sense like, all right, you know, I'll deal with this. Like, that's what the chapel does. And it's not really the chapel. It's who's in the chapel. It's Jesus in our lives. Like, he's always with us. When other people aren't, and in this case with me, they were with me, my friends. I just thought they weren't. But say that story was true. Say they all ditched me. My father was right when he said, you're going to be okay. You're going to get through this. You're going to survive this. Like, that's life. We all go through tough times in life. And I was thinking about Tim Tebow's message yesterday, and some of the things he kept saying. He must have said like 50 times how loved you guys are. And another 50 times how you're not alone. And I think maybe in a way, like, that's what I felt when I went into that chapel that night. Like, I'm not alone. This stinks, but I'm not alone. And I'm going to be okay. And then Tebow mentioned, first thing he said, I think, almost the first thing he talked about, statistics, especially with kids today. And how, like, these crazy, troubling stats, kids are, like, more and more than ever sad. They're struggling with loneliness and anxiety. They feel disconnected. In some cases, worse, suicidal thought. Kids are killing themselves. They're attempting to kill themselves more than they were in the past. Like, bad stuff is happening. It's like kids are it's like the house is on fire. Except it's not a house, it's a person, it's people. You know what's interesting? What's exploding, increasing is sadness. You know what's disappearing in statistics? Faith. People don't go to church anymore nearly the way they used to. People don't pray anymore the way they used to. More and more people today say, yeah, I don't really think I believe in God. Or at least more and more people say, yeah, I'm not really sure. Absolutely, people are like, yeah, I'm not going to go to church. They don't connect. They don't say, no, I'm a Catholic, I'm a Christian. They're like, I don't know. They've disconnected. They've become distant from God. Guys, do you think maybe those two things are connected? Like, everybody's sad and nobody's praying. Maybe they're connected. It's like when we disconnect from God, we feel more alone. And when bad stuff happens, and it's gonna, of course it's just life, if we don't have a place to go to, if we don't remember, hey, I knew enough, all right, when I sat in that chapel, all right, this is lousy, but Brian, it's gonna be okay. Like, you're gonna get through this. And I was lucky enough to have my father to be a voice saying, go get your butt to church. You're gonna be okay. You're not alone, Brian. And that's what Tebow was saying over and over and over again. Like, you're going to be fine. You are not alone. You are loved. You matter. But if I'm not connected to God, we forget those things. You know, when I'm my church right now where I live, I'm down in Long Beach and in Point Lookout. I went down there 11 years ago, and my parish is St. Mary's in Long Beach, and I got there like 10 days before Hurricane Sandy. You guys kind of probably don't remember too much about it, but it was a crazy, crazy hurricane. And that night, when it was really getting bad, I remember I went into the church just to make sure everything was okay. And I'm walking in the church. I had my dog with me. And I'm walking, and I'm maybe midway down the center aisle of the church, and the lights completely went out. And we had, like, you know, there was emergency exit lights. Well, they weren't working. So it was totally black. And I was like, whoa, I couldn't believe it. And then I took another step, and then I walked into water. And I realized, oh my gosh, like, water's come into the church. So it was like that kind of jolted me. And then I kind of got disoriented, and like I turned here, and then I turned there, and then I kind of lost my direction because it was like you couldn't see anything. I could hear my dog. She was like bumping into the pews. It was like a little like, all right, how are we going to get out of here? And I knew I would eventually, but like for a couple of seconds, it was like, oh man, I'm not sure where I'm going. And then, crazy, it's like the wind, it was like, I couldn't believe how loud the wind was outside. And water's starting to come in even more. My feet are getting more wet. And I turned, and there was one light in the church that I noticed. And it wasn't electric. It was a candle. There was one candle that, you know, didn't go out. And it was up by the altar. And it's the candle which says that Jesus is there. We call it the sanctuary lamp. You go into a church, look for a red lamp. You'll always see one. It's usually up by the altar. And what it's saying is, the Eucharist is here. Jesus is present. And when I saw that, then I realized, okay, that's where the altar is. So I figured out where I was going. I was like, I got all mixed up. I was thinking the altar was that way. I'm turning around, and I'm like, oh, crap, there's the candle. And then I turned, and then I realized, all right, if I go back that way, I'm going to make my way out. And I did. You know, I wasn't like I was going to die. It wasn't like I was going to be trapped in there forever. But for a couple of seconds, I was a little off my game. I was a little nervous. And you know what brought me back? The candle. This symbol, the candle's a symbol pointing to the fact that Jesus is present. Well, guys, that's what Jesus does. Like when we're kind of off our game, when we're kind of lost, if we look for him, we make it, in this case, it was literally a storm. Like, you find your way out. It was what my dad was saying to me when I was up in college. Find the chapel, say a prayer, you're going to be okay. And you know, we just hope so much you guys know that and remember that and hold on to that. Because you know what's a given? The storms. Bad stuff happening in life. Like, I'm not hoping it happens, but I know it's going to happen. Like, life is tough. Bad stuff happens. Unfair, scary stuff happens. We can't really do anything about that. But what we can totally do is control how we receive that. Do we let bad things crush us, or do we survive them? It's the gospel. It's like Jesus says, yeah, you build your house on sand, good luck. The first bad storm, and it's history. But if you build it on rock, it will survive the storm. And Jesus was like, I'm the rock. You plant your life on me, you're going to be fine. You know, there was this story, the 1924 Olympics, Summer Olympics, they were in Paris. And the American team, the American team was supposed to win the gold medal in this canoe racing competition, racing canoes. And there was this guy, his name was Bill Havens. He was the captain of this team. And they were supposed to get the gold, or at least be very competitive. Training forever for this. About I don't know, a couple of months, 6 months before the games, Bill's wife finds out that she's pregnant. So they're thrilled. And then she tells him, but the baby's due during the Olympics, like right in the middle of the Olympics. Now this is 1924, so you couldn't like jump on a plane and be back in 7 or 8 hours. You had to take like a giant boat, would take 7 or 8 days. So this was the dilemma. Like, do I go to the Olympics and not be with my wife when she has her baby? Or do I miss the Olympics, this thing I've been planning on kind of forever, even before I met my wife? Do I miss out on this dream? So that was kind of the question. Well, he didn't go. He stayed home to be with her. She was late in having the baby. Like, she was so late, he was home. I mean, the Olympics were over. So he could have done both. He could have done the Olympics, come home, and then been there for his wife. But, you know, he didn't know. He didn't know she was going to be late. So he didn't get the gold. The American team got the gold medal, but he didn't get it. And he never competed again. And he was always asked, do you regret that? Like, do you regret missing out on the Olympics? On a gold medal, no less. And he said, well, I regret not having a gold medal. Yeah, I'd be lying if I said I wish I don't care about not winning it. But he said, I don't regret not going, because there's nothing more important than my wife and our life and our kids. Anyway, fast forward like 28 years, I think it was. It was now the 1950s. And this guy, the Olympic guy, he's at home. He's like, whatever. He's in his 50s maybe. And he gets a telegram from Finland, which is where the Olympics were happening that summer. And it's from his son Frank, who was the kid who was born, his first son. And the telegram says, Dear Dad, I got it. I won the gold. The medal you never got because you put me first. And he said, it's yours. So his son competed in the same competition 20-something years later, and he got the gold medal. Guys, just think about some of the people you've heard from these last couple of days. Those girls, I was talking about the college softball champions. Champions, like epic champions, who were like, yeah, this is great, but it's not most important. Like, Jesus is number one. Jesus is number one. What's the hat? Who's got the hat? What does the hat, the baseball hat say? Christ is my coach? What does that say on it? Like, that's what those softball champions say. Yeah, like, Jesus is most important. Don't get me wrong. Competing is incredibly important. Being an athlete is incredibly important, but not most. I mean, Tim Tebow's entire life, kind of suggests that. Put God first. Put God first, and you win. The Olympic guy, he put God and the people in his life first. He sacrificed what he wanted. You know what people do? What they're doing now is they're making other things God. Why those statistics? Why are kids committing suicide way more than ever? Why is there sadness more than ever? I think it's because of this, and I think it's what Tim Tebow was pretty much suggesting in his whole talk. Because they've forgotten who God is. So when bad stuff happens, they don't know where to go. Because they made baseball the most important thing in their life. And for an entire season, the family doesn't go to church. All they do is travel. All they do is practice. All they do is go to games. They're like, yeah, we just don't go to Mass for 6 months. Because the most important thing is your baseball career. I was at a game. I was sitting in the bleachers last summer. And it was like like 5th graders playing a Little League game. And I was listening to this mother and this father sitting a little ways down from me who were like out of their minds. Like they never shut up. They were screaming at the ump, screaming about bad calls. They never stopped. Like there was like constant cheering their kid on. I wanted to be like, would you shut up? Like the kid is like 11 and he's not even that good. Like what are you thinking? Why are you so out of your head about this, Mom and Dad? Because I think they've made that kind of their God. That's become most important. You know, the college I went to, I was telling you about, it was Cornell, which is a really good school. There was a famous bridge on Cornell. They call it Suicide Bridge. Because what kids used to do when they couldn't cope with the pressure of academics, they'd jump off it and they'd kill themselves. They've now built like a covering so you can't jump off the bridge. But they were kids, the kids who would kill themselves, they were kids who made academics their God. That's the most important thing in my life. And now for the first time in their life, they're competing with other smart kids. I transferred in there. I wasn't one of those smart kids. I never even thought about killing myself because my grades were never that good to begin with. But these kids couldn't believe that they weren't crushing it. And they couldn't deal with it. So they quit and they would kill themselves. It's like when you make academics, when you make sports the most important thing in your life, and then when you don't succeed, well, then what do? There's nowhere to go. But if God is number one, it's like I survive the storm. I want the best grades I can get. I want to be a champion. I want to be in shape. But it's not most important. I'm thinking of the Olympic guy. It's like, those who do the right thing get the gold. Those who do the right thing are the ones who win. So win.